Hey, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting our students to learn what we teach. And I am Rob Alvarez. I'm the founder of Professor Game and professor of gamification and games-based solutions at IE Business School, EFMD, EBS University, and many other places around the world. And if this content is for you, then please go ahead and subscribe to our email list for free at professorgame.com/subscribe. Hey, engagers, and welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And we have a very special guest with us today. But Mai, before we get started, we need to know, are you prepared to engage?
Yes, absolutely.
Let's do this because Mai P. Trinh, is that well pronounced? Decently?
Yes.
She is an assistant professor in Leadership and Interdisciplinary Studies at Arizona State University. Her scholarly works empower people to become the best leaders that they can be so that we can build more equitable and an equal world together, which is from the top down, and she combines complex adaptive systems science with agent-based modeling to reveal systemic patterns of inequalities, examine the effectiveness of plausible solutions, and recommend leadership actions to alleviate equity and equality. From the bottom up, she uses experiential learning theory to help leaders develop key competencies and improve leadership training and education. And her work serves to advance two of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, number 10, reduced inequalities, and number 5, gender inequality. And she has long been using game-based learning and gamification to help her students learn effectively. She has published innovative experiential methods to develop leadership competencies, such as using mobile app games to improve learning flexibility and using gamification to foster quantitative literacy skills. And her latest workshop on applying gamification in management education was a finalist for the Best Professional Development Workshop Award at the 2022 Academy of Management Annual Conference. So, Mai, there are many exciting things happening in your world. Is there anything that we're missing that the audience should know before we take off?
No, that sounds about right, Rob. I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Amazing. So Mai, the first thing we always like to know is, what does a regular day with you look like, or a regular week, whatever that is? We kind of want to get into your professional life a little bit.
Wow. So I'm a university professor, right? And most people, when they think about being a university professor, they immediately think about teaching, which is a big part of what I do. But being a professor is more than just that, right? I'm also a researcher. I'm a social scientist. I'm an educator in the broad sense of the word. I'm a leader developer, a leadership coach, a lifelong learner, and most importantly, a wife and a mother. My regular day is actually structured very much based on my family schedule. I am very lucky in the sense that the academia and my job particularly give me the flexibility to structure the day as I would like. So in the morning, we would get up, get everyone out of the house, my son go to preschool. And then after that, I usually spend a good couple of hours on research because that's the most important thing that I need to do in the day. And I really go by Stephen Covey's principle of the big rocks first. So doing your most important task first in the day so that the rest of the day you can have no guilt about it and do whatever that you need to do. So usually research first, and then afternoon spent with teaching, grading, developing curriculum, all of that. Meetings go into afternoons usually. And then after my son get back from school, that's family time. So I've really, really tried hard to not work during the nights and weekends and spend time with family as well as personal development. So I do meditation, and I spend a good amount of time on that every day.
Sounds amazing. Sounds like you have quite a very well-packed schedule as well. So I'd like to congratulate you for that. It sounds pretty mindful and, well-structured and organized. I hope you are always able to keep up with that amazing schedule.
Well, I mean, it's always a dynamic balancing act, right? You have plans, but as any parent with young children would know, once your kid is sick or, anything happens in your kid's life, plans go out of the window. So I really try to work hard during the days that I am free, right? So that when, plan A has to become plan B and plan C and plan D, I have the room to move around with that. And I actually write about that in my scholarly research. We all need some slack in our day.
Amazing. It sounds great. Love it. Thank you for sharing that, Professor Mai Trinh. So talking about, when things don't go as you planned or as you expected, we always like to share with our audience what we like to call our favorite fail or first attempts in learning. So one of those times where you were trying to do things one way and it definitely did not work the way you were expecting, especially when it comes to using something around game-based learning, games for education. I don't know, anything along those lines that we know as well is a big part of your focus too.
Sure. So the first time I actually stumbled upon the idea of gamification, that has been a pretty big part of my scholarly life in the last probably 3 years or so. And it's just becoming bigger. One small idea is becoming bigger ideas and bigger programs of research and bigger projects. So I'm excited about that. But when I first came across the idea, I was like, okay, I know other people have done this. Let me look around and search for what it is and what has been done and what I should do. So it was 2020, the start of the pandemic, and my department launched our first graduate degree program. There was a lot of work done up until that point, but the official launch was determined to be spring 2020. And of course, we all know what happened. So there were lockdowns, there was just shifted and chaos in people's lives and schedules. And I was tasked with teaching a graduate level statistics class. So, I've had experience teaching statistics since 2012. So I've taught it many times at different levels, undergrads, MBAs, and even PhD levels. But I don't think anyone ever come to me and say, wow, I'm so excited about this, professor. Teach me about statistics. Right? It's one of the things
especially in business, right? Business students are not expecting much on this area.
Well, but statistics is all around you, and it's the age of big data. And if you can't even read tables and graphs, that's serious problems with quantitative literacy that we're trying to overcome here. And so I was like, all right, I'm teaching subject that I like, but I don't think any of my students would. And then it is asynchronously online. It is accelerated. So I have 7.5 weeks to cover 15 weeks of material. And that was already after I pushed back against requests that I teach it during a 5.5 summer session. And I'm like, there's no way I can do that. They're going to hate me and hate staff after this. And it was during the pandemic, right? So I was like, okay, well, all of the environmental factors are kind of stacking up against me here. What can I do? And that's kind of how I came to gamification. I'm like, okay, I do play games in my real life, right? I'm a gamer. I like playing games. I've been using game-based learning in teaching for as long as I've taught. So let's do this. I think turning it all into a game can help students release some of that stress and can really help them kind of enjoy the learning experience instead of feeling like they are blanking out after just seeing a big data set, right? So I was really hopeful. I looked and I saw a lot of good examples and I was like, okay, great, let's do this. And I had it all planned out, spent a lot of time kind of designing the game, designing the class, designing the graphics, the badges, make it all look like a video game environment. Actually, my students said that my homepage of my class either looked like Zelda or Super Mario Brothers. So that was great. But the failure came even before I launched the class, because we had a process here in my school that you actually get help from instructional designers, and they also kind of help you go through and make sure that everything in the class goes well, instructions are easy to understand and all of that. And so my instructional designer looked at my class and said, oh my, that looks really cool and really fun, but I'm just confused. I don't know what this is doing. And I paused hard. I'm like, I thought to myself, right? Like, how can you not know what, as a gamer, you're used to going to a game and you see like a menu and you know where to click. And I have a big red start button in my homepage. I'm like, don't you think that you would click that start button, right? But then she helped me realize that I had actually put that start button not on top and on the bottom, which to me was like just an aesthetic element by that time. But to people who don't play games, it's really confusing to see start at the end. right? And it's also really confusing to see a bunch of buttons and not text and not links. And so, I mean, it all looked cool, but here's my friend, my instructional designer, who gave me really good feedback for this course and who are very used to teachers developing courses. And she said, I have no idea what this is. And I have no idea how this class is going to work. Even though, I had a syllabus and then I thought I explained everything clearly, but nope. So a month or maybe two before the class launched, I actually had to go in and not redo everything I did, thankfully, but explain everything I did in a very kind of how to game 101 manner.
Painful detail.
Yes. And by that time, by the time that you're done with the designing process, you thought, oh, great, I'm done. This is such a great thing, such a good experience. And I hope the students are going to have a good experience too. And then someone tell you, nah, actually it's not yet. Right? And you're like, oh. So I'm still very grateful that she caught that though, because it helped a lot after the launch.
I was going to say, the best news is you caught it before anything happened, right?
We did. But after the launch, students are still confused. And
okay.
all of these years, the course is in its 7th iteration now. And I've done better and better, and I keep adding instructions. Like I've got a tutorial version. I've got a text version explaining how to play this game, how can you win, how do you get badges, how do you get money, and all of that. And students are still confused, but I think the confusion is less and less over time. So I don't know if it's something that can be completely erased.
They're not giving me a lecture and some videos and some questions in a test. What's going on?
Yeah. So lessons learned, whenever you do something different, be very, very clear about what you're doing and what you expect.
Yeah. And when you think you're being clear, then you have to sit down and be clearer.
Right. Yeah.
and then again, a couple of times, right?
Yeah, I also get a lot of comments in the forums of, well, I don't play games. I'm not a gamer. I've never played game before. How do I do this? So luckily, I also have normal version, which is if you don't like games, then just do this as a regular class. Here are your modules. Here are your lectures. Here are your quizzes and all of that. So it works too if you don't like to play games. But to my surprise, a lot of people resist the idea of gaming because it's not serious.
Interesting. And I like the fact that you actually make the game 100% voluntary, because if you don't want to do it as a game, you have the regular option of being, normal class, everything as expected, but if you want to do it like this, here's a great option that you have. And of course you have to sell it well and so on, but that what they say always, that a game is a game until it's mandatory.
Right.
Then it stops being a game, it stops being fun. So I love the concept of you having them, really have that available option of saying, what, I opt out. It still works. Love it. So Mai, thank you very much for that experience. I'm sure the engagers are taking furious notes from everything that you've said, because there's real life, a lot of real life right there, and a lot of great experiences from and lessons to learn from what you've done. And Mai, actually, how about we go the other way now? Instead of going for a time where you had a fail or a first attempt in learning, how about a time where you're happy with the results of what you did with, again, game-based learning, gamification, whatever you want to go for it, because we want to be there. We want to perhaps hear some of the, let's call them, success factors that you have in there.
Yeah. So, even before I went to college, before I get an idea that, people actually use games in teaching, I've always liked games, right? And humans has a very long history with games, right? It goes back thousands of years in different forms. But games are usually fun, right? And I believe that people learn best when they have fun. So even when I was, a middle school student, and I would tutor my younger siblings, and I would come up with ideas of activities in class, which is now called game-based learning, and help them learn better. Examples would be using Scrabble in an English class, right? Imagine with foreign learners and they're just trying to kind of learn vocabulary and words. Playing Scrabble is one way, or playing a very simple kind of word game in which one person write a word and then the next person have to write a word that starts with the last letter of the previous word. Just small games like that in learning has always been a part of my life when I'm trying to teach other people something. And that started very, very early on. And so my adventure into like serious pedagogical game and game-based learning and gamification, all of that actually started in graduate school. When I, really talked to David Kolb and get to know his experiential learning theory. And to me, above all, what the theory suggests to me is that there are more ways to learn than just the traditional kind of lecture tests, reading books and doing analytical problems, writing essay kind of way, right? And for me, who has never liked learning in that way, it's a validation. It's like, yes, you and all of the tricks that you thought about to help people learn better when having fun worked. And it's legit. And here's a theory that has been used for decades that kind of reaffirmed that to me. So that's why I really took that to heart. And in my classrooms, like always, there's some activities to teach a concept. So game-based learning, I've used that for a long time. For example, even when teaching online, I have people use mobile app games to teach the topic that I need to teach them. So an example would be using escape games. I love escape rooms, and escape rooms are actually being used a lot in reality in different subjects, especially nursing, to teach skills while maintaining engagement and helping people have fun. So in an online context, you can't have physical escape room, but there are a lot of free escape games that you could just download, right? So one way that I've used it is to ask people to download the game. Again, very, very clear instruction because you're doing something new. Here's the screenshot. Here's the game I want you to download. But please, download it and play the game. And depending on what I'm trying to teach, I would have them download different games or play to different levels. So for example, if I want to teach, say, learning flexibility, which is, how can you change your learning style and change your learning approach to address the need of the situation, then I would have them download like a really, really difficult game like Aloha, tribute to David Kolb, who now lives in Hawaii. So it's a really, really difficult game. And unless you are a veteran in like these kind of escape games, it's almost impossible to get through it by yourself in one go. Like most likely you would struggle. And the purpose of the game is to see what people do when they struggle. Some people would really quickly enlist the help of their friends and family members or, pulling some other classmate to play with them and then discuss the possibilities and, just figure out what the solutions are. Some other people quickly discover that the game itself allow you to watch ads to get a hit. Well, because these are all free games. So they would take that. And then some people just really is determined to figure it out by themselves and sometimes would spend a few days being frustrated with not being able to figure out the answer, right? Also interesting is to watch if they give up or not. I know it's a very interesting thing, but I've also done research on learning identity, which is our own belief about our ability as a learner. So put it another way, when you face a challenge, do you shy away from the challenge thinking, oh, I can't do that? Or do you step up and think, okay, well, I don't know how to do this yet, but I can figure it out. And so facing a challenge, facing a hard game is a really good example to show that, hey, look at your own process, look at your own learning process, look at your own behavior, and no judgments here. But this is what you did, and this is what it states about you. So if you refuse to get help and spend a few days getting frustrated, and obviously you're not overcoming this challenge in front of you, what does that say about you as a person? And what does that say about you as your working style in reality? And are you happy with that? If you are, that's fine. Being aware is good. But if you're not happy with how you are learning and working and solving problems, then let's talk about how we can help you change that. So in that case, the escape game is a very concrete in this case, frustrated, experience that help people learn very effectively and better than any lecture that I could give. But I can also give them a relatively easy kind of beginner level escape game so that they can look at, oh, this is cool, this is fun, like I'm solving the problems, I'm moving on, right? But then there are other topics to be learned in that moment as well. So that's an example that game-based learning worked really, really well for me.
Huh. Sounds like a very, very good story. Some pretty good times that you've had with that for sure. So it's obvious that you've been doing this for a long while, that, you have plenty of good experience doing this. If you were going to approach a new class like you did with your statistics course, and you said, well, you know what, I'm going to use my experience with games and all this stuff that I've been doing for a while, I want to use it here. How would you do it? Is there a process? What would be the steps? How would you go about it?
So I do follow processes and I do follow theories, learning theories particularly. Experiential learning theory is one, which suggests that learners learn better when you engage all modes of the human being in addition to just thinking. And the four modes are experiencing, reflecting, thinking, and experimenting. So whatever I do, I make sure that all the four boxes are checked, that I'm including a variety of learning styles and ways to learn to help my students and my learners achieve the content. A second model that I've come to use recently is the TPACK model, which stands for technology, pedagogy, and content knowledge. So I think one thing that we usually pay attention to when designing a class is content knowledge the most, right? This is the content of the class
Yeah.
that you need to teach. So in my statistics class, for example, the content is statistics. Unfortunately, not everyone's favorite content, right?
I can attest to that for sure.
But the second component that is less often paid attention to is pedagogy. What is your teaching style? What is your pedagogical philosophy? And I think that depending on what degree you get or where you get trained, pedagogy is not often talked about. I know a lot of graduate programs just kind of shove students into teaching and say like, hey, do it, without ever training them to become a good teacher. So that's a challenge. And I would say that professors need to first be clear about how they like to teach. One guidance can come from the Kolb's educator role profile that suggests that, well, there are kind of four broad educator roles: the coach, the facilitator, the content expert, and the evaluator. And again, you should mix up those styles instead of just adopt one. If you just want to be the content expert and just go and lecture and give tests and things like that, well, that worked in the past. But I don't think that's going to work anymore in the future. You need to be more than just the content expert. And as probably a lot of educators can attest to nowadays, learners do require more of us, right? They need us to facilitate discussion and talk to students, help students, and coach them to learn better and give them feedback, help them set goals, like do all these other things that a teacher in maybe the 80s would not be expected to do. And then finally, the last component is technology, which is now a big part of my research agenda as well as my practice because, well, technology is here, right? There's really no way to escape that anymore. And so instead of kind of running away from technology, how can we really use technology to optimize what we need to do? In this case, to maximize the pleasure and the engagement and the learning outcomes and all of that in the learning teaching process. And so really any design decision should be a marriage of those three aspects: technology, pedagogy, and content knowledge. Say that I teach statistics, right?
Sure.
And my style, my pedagogical philosophy is experiential learning. So I want students to actually experience something for themselves in the learning process. Well, then you can kind of see how I naturally gravitated towards gamification here. In a role-based playing in game environment, it lets students experience something. Or in my example of the escape game, just navigating through the app, finding things, flipping switches, opening doors and cabinets, things like that. That's a concrete experience that's oftentimes missed the most in online environments. And so in this case, then my pedagogy and my content knowledge kind of make me go to find, okay, well, what technology can help me? And then once I find that technology, maybe that it allows me to do even more than I started out with. And so I can go back and possibly change some of the ways that I would handle my pedagogy and content knowledge. An example would be that we have access to something called plausible here, which allows you to insert quiz questions or called interactive questions in the middle of video, for example. So what that technology helped me is that it allows me to create lecture videos with self-check questions afterwards to see if learners actually understood what I just said. And so it's also the interaction with the instructor, and it helps with both the content and the pedagogical aspect of the designing process. So I think those are the two broad theories or frameworks that I use most frequently these days. But I would encourage anyone interested in using game-based solutions, just look at the learning objectives, look at what you need to do, so the content knowledge, look at your own style, the pedagogy, and then look at the technology that you want to use. You can do game-based learning without any technology. Paper and pencil works just fine. But these need to be thoughtful decisions, not just, well, I just decided to do this on a whim.
Yeah. And that's something I love to to explain in my workshops as well. When I'm talking about game-based learning, about gamification, it's whatever decision you make, keep in mind that it's a choice. You are making a choice for good and for bad. So, make that choice consciously. Make sure that you're doing it for whatever for you are the right reasons. Again, whatever those reasons may be, make sure you have them, because then you'll be able to justify yourself in front of yourself and in front of others of why you did this and not this other thing, for example. So love it.
Right.
Thank you very much for that process. Is there anything else?
Yeah, well, I want to clarify a little bit.
Sure.
Don't get me wrong. You can have creative moments that suddenly you have a really good idea and you're like, oh, maybe I can use that into whatever class or to teach whatever topic. And then it's probably take you a few tries to get it right. So, but that idea likely comes as a result of your cumulative experience up to this point. Like you either is an expert in the content or you've been doing this long enough to identify how that idea can be used in a certain context. So, I mean, a random idea that I come up to teach my leadership class tomorrow is probably going to be very different from a middle school student suddenly thought of a good idea, but they've never had experience teaching the topic or running the class. And so creative moments can happen, but it happened for a reason. And if you can become conscious or aware of the reasons behind it, then you're likely more effective than just let it run with no principles at all.
Fantastic. Sounds great. I love it. And again, it's, as you're saying, it comes from the experience. You have a larger, broader, or at least different toolbox from other people. As you were comparing yourself to a middle school student, for example, your toolbox is different because your experience is different and what you've been through, which takes you to make certain decisions and to come up with certain ideas. 100% innovation, something that is entirely new out of nowhere. You can almost argue that doesn't really exist. Everything comes from somewhere, right? Like there is some form of a even distant precedent that helped you come up with that idea. So thank you for that, Mai, for sure. Just a quick break before we continue with this episode. If you've been enjoying this podcast, I would really appreciate if you share it with your friends and family and on social media. On Twitter and Instagram, it's @RobAlvarezB and the hashtag ProfessorGame, all one word. And in Facebook, you can find the Professor Game page. Thanks in advance for your engagement. And Mai, I love all of the things that you've been sharing. You've been super generous with us. I would like to know if after answering these questions, somebody comes to your mind, you would say, well, I would like to listen to this person as well, answering these questions in the podcast. So sort of a future guest for Professor Game.
Yeah, so I'm actually working with a team right now on a project on gamification, and I think that my colleagues would be very good future guests for you. So Sophia Schobel is one, and then Andreas Jansson is another. I can send you their information later. But they have also been doing a lot of creative things around game-based learning, gamification, technology, AI, bots. So I think they will be very, very interesting people to listen to.
They sound amazing. And if they've been working on your team, I'm sure they have their own special insights as well of the work that you have been doing. For sure. I love it. Thank you. And in that same sense of recommendations, perhaps there might be a book that you would say, well, if the engagers read this book, they might get, whether it's inspiration or direct knowledge on the area of game-based learning, game-based solutions, whatever you want to go for.
Well, you know what? I've been searching for that perfect book, but I don't think I'm happy with any yet.
Huh.
I've looked at a few, but I think they're still missing something. Like each of them miss different aspects.
Huh.
But I'm not comfortable recommending any books right now yet. I think
Okay.
a lot of articles and blog posts actually is where I'm getting a lot of inspiration.
Amazing. Is there any particular place where you go when you're looking for your, I mean, of course, when it's blogs, you always look for several. Maybe you can mention a couple, or I don't know. Is there somewhere you go when you want to look for this written information?
Well, I'm a researcher, so I look at journals the most, right? So, for example, Simulation and Gaming is the journal that has a lot of content related to games.
Uh-huh.
And then there is a conference called NASAGA, NISAGA. I think it stands for North American Gaming and Simulation Association, something like that.
Yeah, it's like North American Simulation and Gaming Association, maybe?
Right. Yes.
Maybe. I don't know. I've heard it before. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah. So it's a great collection of people who are passionate about using games in their work. And it's really fun to kind of come and listen to them and play some games and play test and give feedback and all of that.
Amazing. And what would you say, Mai, is your superpower in this world of game-based learning and gamification? What would you say that you do at least better than most other people?
Oh, I'm not sure if I'm better than most, but the best skill that I have, how about that?
Okay.
Better than myself, better than my other skill. I think learning is my superpower. I'm really eager to learn. And so when I see something new or a new idea, I can immediately think about I can apply that in some situation, or I can twist that, I can modify that to make it helpful. So I think that's kind of what helped me be exposed to and just really getting into all of the new exciting things that are going on in the world, including, all this thing about virtual reality and AI and bots and all of that too.
Amazing. So many exciting things going on out there for sure. Sometimes, I don't know if it happens to you, but it's sometimes a little bit overwhelming. It's like, well, there's all these things. Which one do I follow?
Right.
You can't follow them all at once. So I don't know, it's interesting. It's an interesting world for sure.
Yeah.
And we come to a difficult one. You mentioned as well that you are a lifelong gamer, that you enjoy playing games. So this one might come as a difficult one. Mai, what would you say is your favorite game?
I don't think I have a favorite game. I have a favorite genre of game, which is strategy. I like strategy. So, in board games, like Settler of Catan is probably something that people would know, right? Seven Wonders.
Yeah.
Splendor, Sagrada. So I generally like games that meet the strategy. And then even with computer games, app games, and MMO RPGs, I like strategies.
Those are amazing games for sure. That's something I enjoy very much. I don't know. I just like games so much.
Well,
I'm not sure
fun.
how I would go about that question, because I wish I could even say I like strategy games, but then I also I've been enjoying, lately in the past few years, especially since the pandemic, I enjoyed a lot playing Fortnite, for example, which is the third person shooter. And I've been enjoying as well games like Spider-Man. That's, it's sort of kind of an open world game. I have a few of those as well. And they kind of have a little bit of strategy, but not really. So I can't say I have I've been even playing FIFA, like a football game for quite a while. So I don't know. It's a difficult, I would be having trouble when somebody comes and asks that question as well. I'll say something for sure, but it is a difficult one when you're a big lover of games as well.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a tough one. So thank you very much for all of those recommendations, so all of that experience, Mai. I don't know if you have any final words. Especially, we would like to know where we can find out more about what you're doing, about your work, or maybe where we can find you online before we'd say it's game over.
Well, you can search for me online, right? I have a LinkedIn profile, I have my Google Scholar profile, and obviously I have a official webpage on my university's website. So please look me up and read the stuff that I've published. It's all cool ideas. And some of my publications are actually like pedagogical guidelines of how to do something. So how to use the mobile app escape game that I mentioned, how to gamify a class. I have checklists of 10 points that is published on the Nature website, Nature Career section. So you can look at that. Or, how to implement some of these other more serious pedagogical training in the field of leadership in online environments. So, yeah, and I'm happy to follow up with anyone who is interested. Thank you for doing this, Rob, and keep up the good work. I think this is something very exciting that you're doing. And I truly, truly believe in the power of games in the broad sense, right? To help people learn and to do good things in the world. I say that too, especially as a mother, because my son is growing up in this digital age, and it's very important to me that he knows what's real and what's not, and be able to make his own decision and judgment. And so I think games is a great venue to do that.
Amazing. I have to agree with you. I mean, I do remember back in the day when they told you, and I always make the comparison, right? That and recently it's happened again, that, the violence is because of video games, and the games are doing this to our minds and this and that. And then you start going back, and they said the same thing about TV, and they said the same thing about radio. And if you go a little bit further back, you will hear, or you will read, funny enough, I'm not sure if it was Aristotle or Plato or one of these, ancient philosophers saying that the written word was such a threat to our intellect, right? Because you didn't have the challenge of memorizing things as much as before. So again, there's always challenges. There's always good and there's always bad with the new tools and technology that we have, such as the written word. So, amazing. Right, but I think there is a lot of power as well.
Yeah. Well, and especially these days and age, right? Like, just look at AI. I mean, this is probably a different conversation, but I have serious worries about AIs and humans, especially when we are training AI faster than we're training humans.
Yep.
And as an educator, I worry about that for my students. As a mother, I worry about that for my children. If we don't really engage in a collective and public conversation around AI and AI development and all of the things that are going on in the technology world nowadays, I mean, a world that, I don't know if you remember the movie Terminator from probably the 90s, right?
Yeah, it's really definitely old.
Yeah, like a world like that is not far. Sometimes I'm just scared for the future of the human race.
Yeah, it could be a scary future for sure.
So if I can use games to, get to a brighter future, then yes, like I'm all in. And I think that people should be more serious about that too.
Absolutely. Love it. So thank you once again, Mai, for all that experience, all that knowledge, all those recommendations, all that, gloomy AI future as well. Because it's something that we do have to take into consideration. There's all the ethics involved, just as in gamification, just as in many of the actions we take. Ethics have to be a significant part of the discussion with AI and all the technologies that we're developing, because they are a tool, and tools can be used for many different things. So again, thank you very much for all of that, Mai. However, as you now know, and the engagers definitely know, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Engagers, it is fantastic to have you around. So let's connect as well on Twitter. And that way we can, have any type of conversations you want to have there. We can have direct messages, we can have public conversations, whatever you want, even if you want any help directly from me. And you can find my Twitter account as Rob Alvarez B. I'm always sharing content, especially on the podcast and gamification. And, as always, I like to remind you, please don't click continue yet if you haven't subscribed or followed using your favorite podcast app. Please go ahead and do so and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.